The alien creatures pounced onto the humans, biting and tearing mercilessly as blood splattered across the ground, showing no mercy at first. But that was before we learned how to tame the beasts. It was the year 2245. Humanity had colonized dozens of planets across the galaxy, but now an alien menace threatened our very existence. Captain James "Jim" Hawkins commanded the USS Prometheus, patrolling the edge of human space. Suddenly, an unidentified alien ship appeared and opened fire without warning. The Prometheus was heavily damaged. Jim barely escaped and tracked the alien vessel to a nearby star system. There, he discovered a horrifying sight, a massive alien fleet poised to invade human space. Hundreds of ships armed to the teeth. The Zorgans attacked in full force, their ships darkening the skies of a dozen human worlds simultaneously. The UESF fleet scrambled to respond, but it was like trying to plug a leaking dam with tissue paper. The aliens had better shields, better weapons, and better coordination. Our ships burned while theirs flew through the flames unscathed. Jim gritted his teeth as he watched the reports roll in. Another colony lost, another fleet decimated. We were losing ground fast, and morale was plummeting just as quickly. He slammed his fist on the console, making his XO flinch. "We need a miracle, Jim," Commander Sarah Briggs said quietly. "At this rate—" "I know." Jim's voice was hard. "I have an idea, but it's risky." "Riskier than sitting here and watching humanity's slow demise?" Jim shook his head. "We need intel. We're fighting blind. I say we take a small team, infiltrate one of their supply depots, and see what we can learn." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A suicide mission?" "Only if we get caught." They assembled a squad of their best operatives, silent, deadly, and loyal to the end. Jim briefed them personally. "We get in, we get the data, we get out. Quick and quiet, understood?" The team nodded grimly. They knew the stakes. They struck at night, slipping past the Zorgan perimeter defenses and into the heart of the supply depot. Jim led the way, his heart pounding, his senses hyper-alert. And then they saw the cages. Row after row of them, stacked to the ceiling, each one containing a monster straight out of a nightmare. 8 feet tall at least, with scaly hide, razor claws, and teeth like daggers. They hissed and snarled as the team approached, throwing themselves against the bars with savage fury. "My God," Sarah breathed, "what are those things?" Jim's blood ran cold as realization dawned. "Rippers," he whispered. "I've heard stories from the colonies. These creatures, they use them like attack dogs. They've torn entire settlements to shreds." He forced himself to look closer, to study the abominations. They had a vaguely reptilian look, but there was something unnatural about them, something engineered. "They're not just breeding them," he said slowly. "They're making them. Genetically engineered killing machines." Sarah cursed under her breath. "No wonder we're losing. How can we fight against that?" Jim's mind raced. This was the miracle he'd been looking for, but it was a double-edged sword. They had to find a way to stop these creatures, or humanity was doomed. He turned to his team, his eyes hard with determination. "We complete the mission. We get this intel back to HQ, and then we find a way to neutralize these things, whatever it takes. Failure is not an option. Understood?" The team responded with grim nods. They knew this changed everything. The fight was no longer just against the Zorgans, but against the very monsters they had created. As they slipped back into the shadows, Jim's mind was already racing ahead, plotting, planning, searching for any weakness they could exploit. The Rippers were deadly, but they were not invincible. And Jim would not rest until he found a way to stop them. Humanity's fate hung in the balance, and Jim would be damned if he let it tip the wrong way. Jim stood before the holographic display, his eyes hard as he faced down the skeptical expressions of the UESF command. They had listened to his proposal, but he could see the doubt in their eyes. "You want us to risk more lives to capture these things?" Admiral Holden asked, his brow furrowed. "After everything we've lost?" Jim leaned forward, his voice intense. "Sir, we're losing this war. We need a game changer. Studying these rippers, understanding them, it could give us the edge we need. And if it doesn't, another admiral chimed in, if we're just sending more good soldiers to their deaths? Jim met their gazes unflinchingly. Then at least we tried, at least we didn't go down without a fight. There was a long moment of silence. Then slowly Admiral Holden nodded. All right, Captain, you have your mission, but be careful. We can't afford to lose you. Jim saluted. Yes, sir. He wasted no time assembling his team. Bull was his first choice. The big man had been by his side through a dozen campaigns, and there was no one Jim trusted more. Dr. Winters was a harder sell, but Jim knew they needed her expertise. I'm a scientist, not a soldier, she protested when Jim came to her. I don't know how to fight. I don't need you to fight, Jim said. I need you to think, to understand these creatures. No one knows xenobiology like you do. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'm in. They struck fast and hard, slipping aboard a Zorgon ship under the cover of darkness. Jim led the way, his heart pounding, every sense on high alert. They had to move quickly before they were discovered. The Ripper pens were deep in the bowels of the ship, guarded by a phalanx of Zorgon soldiers. Jim and his team moved like ghosts, taking them out one by one with silent efficiency. And then they were in, staring at the caged monstrosities. The Rippers hissed and snarled, their eyes glinting with feral rage. Stun rounds only, Jim ordered. We need them alive. It was a brutal, bloody battle. The Rippers did not go down easily, even with the stun rounds. One of them broke free of its cage, lashing out with its razor claws. Bull threw himself in front of Jim, taking the blow meant for his captain. Bull! Jim cried out, catching his friend as he fell. Blood was pouring from a deep gash in Bull's side. I'm okay, Bull grunted, though his face was pale. Just a scratch. They managed to subdue the Rippers and drag them back to the shuttle, but the cost was high. 2 of Jim's men lay dead, torn apart by the creature's savage claws. Back at the UESF research facility, Dr. Winters threw herself into studying the captured Rippers. Jim paced outside the lab, his mind churning. Had he done the right thing? Were more lives going to be lost because of his decision? Days turned into weeks. Bull recovered from his wounds, though the scars would always remain. And then, finally, Dr. Winters emerged from the lab, her eyes bright with excitement. Jim, she said, you need to see this. She led him into the observation room. The Rippers were no longer in cages, but in a large enclosed habitat. And they were communicating, making complex vocalizations, interacting with each other in ways that almost seemed intelligent. They're not just animals, Sarah said softly. They have a social structure, a hierarchy, and they can learn, Jim. They can be trained. Jim stared at the creatures, his mind racing. Trained to fight for us. Sarah nodded. It's possible, it won't be easy, but if we can turn the Zorgon's own weapon against them... A slow smile spread across Jim's face. For the first time in months he felt a flicker of hope. Then let's get to work. Time was running out. The Zorgon fleet was closing in on Earth and humanity's fate hung by a thread. In the UESF research facility, Jim and Dr. Winters worked around the clock, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion as they sought to unlock the secrets of the Rippers. It was a delicate process, a dance of trust and understanding. The Rippers were not mindless beasts, but intelligent, complex creatures. Jim and Sarah had to learn their language, their social cues, their needs and desires. They started with the basics, positive reinforcement, rewarding the Rippers for cooperative behavior. It was slow at first, but gradually the creatures began to respond. A tilt of the head, a softening of the eyes, a tentative step forward. Jim spent hours in the enclosure, talking softly to the Rippers, letting them grow accustomed to his presence. He brought them treats, played with them, showed them that he was not a threat. Slowly, cautiously, they began to trust him. Sarah, meanwhile, delved into the Rippers' biology. She studied their pheromones, the complex chemical signals they used to communicate. It was a breakthrough when she managed to synthesize a calming pheromone, one that soothed the Rippers' aggression and made them more receptive to training. They worked in tandem, Jim building trust, Sarah providing the scientific key. And bit by bit, the Rippers began to change. Their snarls turned to purrs, their aggressive stances to relaxed, curious postures. They started to follow simple commands, to work together as a unit. But time was running out. The Zorgon fleet was almost upon them, and the UESF was in full panic mode. Admiral Holden called Jim in for an emergency meeting. "Captain, tell me you have something," he said, his face lined with stress, "because right now it looks like we're staring down the barrel of extinction." Jim took a deep breath. "Sir, I believe we do. The Rippers, they're ready." Holden's eyebrows shot up. "Ready? Ready for what?" "To fight, sir. To fight for us, alongside us. We've trained them, gained their trust. They'll follow our commands in battle." There was a long, tense silence. Holden stared at Jim, his expression unreadable. "You're suggesting we send these creatures into battle? The same creatures that have slaughtered our people?" Jim met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir, I know it sounds crazy, but we're out of options. The Rippers may be our only hope." Holden sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "God help us all. All right, Captain, you have your orders. Deploy the Rippers." The battle came upon them like a thunderstorm, sudden and violent. The Zorgon ships darkened the sky, their weapons raining down destruction. The UESF fleet met them head-on, a desperate, valiant defense. And amidst the chaos, the Rippers were unleashed. They surged forward, a tide of teeth and claws and fury. The Zorgons, so used to the Rippers being their unquestioning shock troops, were taken utterly by surprise. The creatures they had engineered to be their ultimate weapon had turned against them. Jim watched from the bridge of his ship, his heart in his throat. The Rippers tore into the Zorgon lines, ripping and tearing, sowing chaos and destruction. They moved with a terrible, savage grace, coordinated and deadly. The Zorgons fought back, their weapons taking a heavy toll. But the Rippers did not stop, did not falter. They had been bred for war, and now, finally, they had a cause to fight for. The tide of battle began to turn. The UESF fleet, emboldened by the Rippers' ferocity, pressed their advantage. Zorgon ships exploded into balls of flame, their lines shattering under the onslaught. And then suddenly it was over. The remaining Zorgon ships turned tail and fled, their invasion thwarted. A cheer went up from the UESF fleet, a cry of victory and relief. Jim sagged back in his chair, exhausted but triumphant. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the Zorgons' own weapon against them. The Rippers had saved humanity. But the war was not over. Jim knew that this was only the beginning. The Zorgons would be back and they would be seeking revenge. But for now, for this moment, they could savor their victory. He looked out at the Rippers, still prowling the battlefield, and felt a surge of pride. They were not just weapons, not just animals. They were allies, companions. They had fought for humanity, and Jim would make sure that humanity fought for them in return. There was still much to do, much to learn. But Jim knew that with the Rippers by their side, humanity stood a fighting chance. They would face the future together, united against any foe that dared threaten them. The Zorgon Emperor's flagship loomed over Earth like a harbinger of doom, casting an ominous shadow across the planet's surface. Jim stood on the bridge of the UESF's last remaining battleship, his jaw set in grim determination. Beside him, his Ripper companions growled and flexed their claws, ready for the fight of their lives. "This is it," Jim said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Everything we've fought for, everything we've lost, it all comes down to this." The Rippers chittered in agreement, their eyes glinting with a fierce, loyal light. They had come so far from the vicious, uncontrollable beasts they had once been. Now they stood as equals, as comrades in arms, ready to lay down their lives for the humans they had once been bred to destroy. The Zorgon fleet surged forward, a seemingly endless swarm of ships bristling with weapons. The UESF responded in kind, the remnants of their once mighty armada moving to engage. The void of space erupted with the harsh staccato flashes of weapons fire, silent explosions blooming like deadly flowers. On the flagship's bridge, the Zorgon Emperor watched with cold, pitiless eyes. "Crush them," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "Wipe this pathetic species from the face of the galaxy." But the humans and their Ripper allies fought with a ferocity born of desperation, born of the knowledge that this was their last stand. They wove through the Zorgon formations, striking hard and fast, taking advantage of every weakness, every gap in their enemies' defenses. Jim gritted his teeth as his ship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, the acrid smell of burning electronics filling the air. But he did not falter, did not hesitate. "We need to take out the Emperor," he shouted over the din of battle. "Cut off the head and the body will wither." The Rippers snarled their agreement, their muscles coiling with anticipation. Jim turned to his helmsman, his eyes hard as steel. "Ram the Emperor's ship full speed." The helmsman blanched, but did not question the order. With a surge of engines, the battleship hurtled towards the Zorgon flagship, the Rippers poised to strike at Jim's side. They hit the flagship like a battering ram, the impact shaking them to their bones. Jim was thrown from his feet, but the Rippers were already moving, tearing through the hull like it was paper, carving a path of destruction towards the bridge. Jim followed in their wake, his weapon at the ready, his heart pounding a furious beat in his chest. They burst onto the bridge like a thunderbolt, the Rippers leaping forward to engage the Zorgon guards in a whirlwind of claws and teeth and fury. The Emperor rose from his throne, his eyes widening in surprise and fear as he saw Jim charging towards him. He reached for his weapon, but Jim was faster, lunging forward to tackle the Zorgon leader to the ground. They grappled furiously, rolling across the deck in a tangle of limbs. The Emperor was strong, his muscles hardened by a lifetime of cruelty and conquest. But Jim fought with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, who knew that the fate of his entire species rested on this moment. With a final desperate effort, Jim pinned the Emperor beneath him, his hands wrapped around the Zorgon's throat. The Emperor's eyes bulged, his mouth gaping in a silent scream as Jim squeezed with all his might. Around them, the Rippers finished off the last of the guards, their blood-soaked claws dripping onto the deck. They watched as Jim choked the life from the Emperor, their eyes glinting with a savage satisfaction. And then it was over. The Emperor's body went limp, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Jim released his grip, staggering to his feet, his chest heaving with exertion. On the view screen, the Zorgon fleet was in disarray, ships milling about aimlessly without their leader to guide them. One by one, they began to power down their weapons to broadcast signals of surrender. A cheer went up from the UESF ships, a cry of victory and relief that echoed across the vastness of space. They had done it. Against all odds, against an enemy that had seemed invincible, they had prevailed. Jim looked at the Rippers, at these creatures who had once been nothing more than savage beasts, and felt a surge of pride and gratitude. They had fought alongside him, had risked their lives for a species they had once been bred to destroy. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't have done this without you." The Rippers chittered and purred, pressing their scaly bodies against Jim in a gesture of affection and camaraderie. They were more than just allies now. They were friends, companions, equals. As the news of the Zorgon surrender spread, as the celebrations erupted on Earth and across the colonies, Jim knew that this was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done, much healing and rebuilding after the devastation of the war. But with the Rippers by their side, with the knowledge that they had faced the greatest threat humanity had ever known and emerged victorious, Jim knew that they could face anything. They had forged an unbreakable bond, a bond of trust and loyalty that would endure for generations to come. The Rippers, once feared as humanity's greatest threat, were now celebrated as heroes, as the saviors of the human race. They had proven that even the most vicious of creatures could change, could learn to fight for a higher cause. As Jim stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the stars drift by, he knew that the future was bright. Humanity and the Rippers together would face whatever challenges lay ahead. They would explore the depths of space, would build a new galactic order based on cooperation and understanding. The war was over. The Zorgans were defeated, and in the end it had not been superior technology or firepower that had made the difference. It had been the unbreakable spirit of humanity and the loyalty of the creatures they had once feared. Jim smiled, his heart swelling with hope and pride. They had won, and now the real work could begin. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.